Welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. First of all, thanks for joining this morning. This is CK Vishwakarma, founder of AllThingsConnected, based out of Singapore. And this is our AllThingsConnected virtual thought leadership series. I would like to thank our wonderful expert and then the speakers from different uh, uh, areas of the work and different locations. So we have Dr. Neha Tripathi. She is a research fellow, organization behavior and future work within my organization. She works with me on All Things Connected. And her background is primarily the organization behavior, where she did her PhD into OB from NUS Business School, as you might know, one of the top business school in the region. Then we have Jeremy on. He is the principal technology investment, Sistema Asia Capital, based out of Singapore again. And he will bring, obviously, the investment perspective, because Jeremy and the team has been dealing with quite innovative companies in the region, from Russia to India to China and the region. So we'll be hearing a lot of interesting insight as me and Jeremy was discussing about how the investment community can be more responsible from the investment perspective on this emerging tech, not just go after the another buzz of AI. And last but not the least, we have wonderful expert from US, Matthew, for joining in. So thanks, Matthew, again, joining us on your dinner time. And as some of you might have already looked at his profile, his long bio, if I start reading, will take some time. So just a quick introduction. He's a author, innovator, and a lot of interesting work he has been doing with both corporate, government agencies, and one of the recent book going to come out, we'll talk about it also on the AI. So a lot of interesting insight from that part of the world, US, because ethics in AI is a complex topic, big topic, applied in almost every vertical where we're talking about IoT, data-driven AI, machine learning-based work, whether it's into industrial IoT, whether it's into healthcare, whether it's a fintech, whether it's smart cities, and so on and so forth. So obviously we can't cover all the issues and the challenge within this about roughly 90 minutes of discussion. But what we want to do today is basically, like I said, bring different perspective on the table. But at the same time, while the audience is also listening to us, you don't have to just silently listen to us. You can also challenge the speakers. You can also put your comments forward.
Thank you so much, CK. And thank you so much for inviting me in today's session. Ethics and AI has been very close to my area of interest, because I have been working on both justice from organizational behavior perspective and also on artificial intelligence. So here I will bring about some of the important thoughts or the things that you should consider when, as an engineer, you are designing AI solutions, or as a strategic manager, you are thinking about deploying an intelligent algorithm in your organization, or from a customer perspective, that how customer will perceive these kind of intelligent algorithms. So starting with workplaces, how AI or intelligent algorithms fit into our organizations. So broadly, we can divide our jobs or workforce into two subcategories: white collar jobs and blue collar jobs. I think 100 years ago or 200 years ago, when the automation picked up, blue collar jobs were affected, because these were very repetitive jobs and efficiency was very low. So automation or the machinery that was used in the product pipeline was to enhance productivity. However, more recently, we were more customer centric, or the organizations have become more customer centric or service centric. Some of the most recent algorithms were used to face the customer interactions. One of the best example in recent time is Google Assistant. Rather than you're talking to a person, you are talking to a machine. However, an intelligent algorithm or machine that kind of tries to answer your queries in best possible ways, but not as intelligent as a human interaction, but still it's an intelligent interaction with the machine. So now even organizations are thinking to go beyond this customer-centric interaction perspective to a more decision-making perspective. So, for example, the TMT that was um, used to be a main decision maker in organization, could intelligent algorithm help them or even later on replace them? So one of the example is investment industry. I think in investment banking, because of the computational power that AI could hold, and the investment decisions, who could be the best advisor based on the previous data to advise you where to invest, whether it's a human or a machine. And mostly because of the computational power that is beyond capacity of any human, people are more likely to entrust intelligent algorithms if they think that this algorithm will provide them more trustworthy options to invest. However, with strategic decision making, ethics also comes into picture, which was not there in automation part. When the blue collar jobs were being replaced by machinery, we did not think about ethics because of the lack of intelligence. Now, since the algorithms are intelligent and they can have their own decision making power, they are able to make decisions. The ethics part is very important here. So we look into the justice at workplace framework that is already there in organizational behavior research. So in organizations, there are four types of justice: distributive justice, procedural justice, interpersonal justice, and informational justice. Distributive justice is mainly pertaining to reward allocation. That means who is rewarded and what are the outcomes. So one of the example is promotion, whether I get promoted or my colleague get promoted or who will get promoted. Of course, the reward thing is very important because these perceptions influence both job characteristics and the motivation of employees at work. However, the research further shows that not only the outcome, like who and what is the reward, but the process that how this reward is being allocated is also very important. And that comes in the procedural justice part. For example, if we all have promotion procedures in our organizations, but from employees' perspective, whether they see these procedures to be fair, if they see that the procedures are fair, then even my colleague who is promoted is justified, and I will not feel bad about it. So that's why the procedural justice is very important factor to mitigate the negative impact of distributive justice. The third part that is very important more recently is the interpersonal justice. And here comes the treatment at work, whether employees are treated in a more respectable way. For example, if a supervisor is abusive, yelling, not giving credit, or even sabotaging the effort, or calling out on names, stereotyping, biases. So all these interpersonal aspect of justice comes into this area. And you may say that, okay, interpersonal justice will not affect in terms of AI because I don't expect my AI to feel bad about if I'm being abusive towards AI. And And I think that is one of the positive part of AI. For example, in Google Assistant, Google Assistant does not care whether someone is abusive towards him or her. Uh, it will directly point to feedback, and no feelings are hurt. Whereas in human context, the feelings are hurt, and that drive motivation a lot. However, on the other hand, from the customer perspective, human interaction is very two-way. So if from the customer perspective, if I'm trying to hurt Google Assistant, but I'm not able to do that, I will be frustrated because I'm talking to machine. So these are the two-way interaction. Although on the one side, interpersonal justice in AI will not impact the feeling of AI itself, but the inhuman part, or the part that is not feeling part in AI, could be impacting customer. So these are the two side perspective that one should think about when we are thinking about intelligent algorithms. And lastly is the informational justice. For example, one of the best example to it is data privacy, where the data is stored, how the data is secured, whether what kind of information should be revealed and what kind of information should be concealed, who should it be concealed from. These kind of informational justice aspect are also very important at workplace. Now, when we talk about the AI stakeholder model, so AI stakeholder model from the industry perspective is by large very much oriented towards creator or the engineers, how we can create intelligent algorithms. However, once the algorithm or intelligent algorithm is created, the decisions to make whether it should be deployed or not deployed from the TMT perspective is who hosts it. So there is a host perspective, whether hosts are ready to are open to deploy these algorithms. And so far, the data suggests that more than 70% top management team members are open to deploy intelligent algorithms, which is fantastic. However, when it comes to end user or customer perspective, there is a whole new lens of looking at AI. Because now customer, so if say we have an intelligent algorithm to do an operation in medical sector, whether so host is fine, host is able to deploy this intelligent robot who can do operations and do the medical procedures. Creators are also very happy that yes, we have this very intelligent machine, but end users may not want to do it if it is a very serious procedure, because the kind of decision or the expertise that human may bring will be different from the machine's perspective, who can only do at the logical thinking. So this kind of perspective differ from creator to host to end users. And lastly, we have to, when we think about ethics, we have to think from distributive, procedural, interpersonal, and informational justice, integrated with the stakeholder model, so that we can design more wholesome AI systems that could cater to the perspective of both all engineers, top management, decision makers, as well as customers. Now, all these things happen in a context where there is a switch, whether the same task is done by human or the same task is done by AI. And then we have to think about the justice perspective. Do you trust more AI in this context, or do you trust more human human interaction in that context? And if in such context, humans are preferred, then what are the things or characteristics that are being not implemented or are very difficult to implement in terms of AI, and why, how AI could be enhanced to deliver such values or such abilities that humans can perform. So one of the main problem, or I would say the main attribute that people are still not ready, is leadership roles. Are we ready to be led by AI? Perhaps not. We still want our leader to be a human. We don't want to receive instructions from intelligent algorithm what to do. So these kind of factors from the ethics and from the justice perception that will influence both from all stakeholders, the creators who are creating intelligent algorithms, and the top managers who are deciding whether to implement these algorithms or deploy these algorithms, and also from the end user's perspective. And with the advent of Industry 4.0, all these issues are very important. And I opened the platform to both audience as well as speakers to think about in these directions as well. What kind of justice is being impacted, and how can we make more trustworthy algorithms at workplace? So this is all from my side from today, and off to you, CK.
So let's give a round of applause to Neha, to virtual world. And we'll bring you back into the conversation shortly in the panel discussion. And what we're going to do now is a kind of a little bit of one-to-one discussion with Matthew while we all are kind of sharing the screen.
Well, before we do that, CK, that was a wonderful presentation. There were two of the Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics mentioned by Dr. Neha Tripathi, justice and trustworthiness, but there are another 10 that need to be included within AI ethics, and we'll talk briefly about that in the book. In fact, we talk about extent about the book. So that was wonderful. What a great presentation. Thank you ever so much. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you. Yeah. So let's hear a little bit from Matthew's views. So while, like I said, we all will be on the screen. I supposed to have one-to-one conversation with Matthew, but let's go into the open conversation with everybody else.
Okay.
I didn't realize that it won't be just me and you on the screen.
That's fine. Yeah. Anybody can chip in, I don't mind.
Right. And we still have a presentation from Jeremy. Like I said, the interesting topic on the investment perspective. So Matthew, so for the benefit of all the speakers, as well as the participants, maybe you could give a quick introduction about your long work in industry as well as corporate. How would we know you as? How should we know you as?
Well, consider me a man of the people and the man of the planet. My passion is really about how do we bring the digital world into partnership with the future and destiny of humanity in a purposeful and meaningful way. And that's why I got involved with the IoT revolution and recognized as one of the pioneers globally in the IoT, because I knew very well that we needed data to understand the very complicated human-centric systems throughout our entire life, business, nation, etc. And that took me into focusing on the planet and working with some very big investors and corporates like ARM Holdings. Most of you have used ARM chips in your on that. And then I moved into smart cities because that was kind of the environment. And then I moved into smart cities because that was very important, because we know that most of the people at the moment live in cities, and assuming that everything goes according to predictions, that's where the majority of people in this world will be living. And so we need to make those efficient. So I've co-founded the US's only and the largest statewide alliance in Colorado, built and raised money for innovation centers in smart cities, and even built global practices. So I don't mind, in smart cities, I don't mind rolling my hands up and doing the hard work. And that is one of it. And when it comes to innovation, I'm all about empowering the local stakeholders to innovate their future, which is, so I wrote a white paper on this many years ago, and that's being used and downloaded by about, I don't know, 700 cities now, about a third of the world. And I had to change the conversation. It's like, if cities want to innovate their future and build their partnership with the digital world, then it really should come from the local stakeholders. And that is a strong innovation play. It's a strong technology cluster play. It's a strong economic development play. So about 10 years, I knew I was going to get into this conversation in artificial intelligence. And, you know, I've sat down with G7 countries and the very top, let's just say, of those countries, advising them on their AI strategy, both at home and abroad. And so if you want to put up the slide, if you want, we can share a few announcements with the group that haven't been made before. And if we're able to do that, then I'll yeah, if you can share that slide, that'd be great.
I hope you can see the screen.
Yeah, I can see it. Hopefully everybody else can. Oh, there we are. Great. Okay, great. So the new book is called Inventing World 3.0, and you can buy it on Amazon now for a pre-sales price. We're just refining the book. We've just had beta readers from around the world, global innovators, take a look, and we're refining some of the layout of the book. But this is a brand new approach to ethics. It goes to the fundamental of the evolution of an intelligence. And it really, nothing like this has ever been written before. The foreword, and I can announce, will be written by an AI guru that's published about 150 patents in technology and AI from the world's biggest computing company. So it's going to have a great foreword by that. And also, we're going to be announcing, and in fact, you can see it here, people can take a screenshot if they want, an AI Ethics Academy. And this is for business leaders, it's for government, it's for developers and innovators, and it's also coaching for probably what we're going to see as a standard within a business, a Chief AI Ethics Officer. And so this is something that we'll be officially announcing when the book goes live, which will be mid-September, end of September, and people can have a look at that at aiethics.world. And also, the book really gets to the fundamentals of what are ethics, okay? And so how do we move from the reality that we have at the moment, which is what I call World 1.0, and which is human-centric systems and an AI that has no context of the ethics of an individual, the ethics of a culture, the ethics of a business, the ethics of a family, the ethics of a nation, and even the ethics around how do we use AI to solve the climate change problem we have at the moment. And so within the book, we reveal brand new approaches to artificial intelligence, brand new approaches to AI ethics, and we call it evolutionary ethics. And we explain how this can solve global problems based on some world conditions in order to then move us into World 2.0, which is where the human and machine are starting to discover how they work together. And then into World 3.0, where the human and the machine are walking in harmony and balance because the machine has understood our ethics at a cultural level, right? So justice to you may be different to justice to me. Justice in one culture may be different in another culture. And so we need to look at the fundamentals of the individual. Now, how do we do that? We need to consider data ethics. And so the book contains a brand new model, which we hope will become an ISO standard, around data ethics, examining the fundamentals of ethics in data, culture, and also in the environmental footprint of AI itself. And so this new standard model actually creates new medals for AI concerning its ethicalness. And so what we're doing is, and Smarter.ai that's on here, and people can look up Smarter.ai, have adopted this model. They're the first ones to adopt this model. And basically, it allows us to say, what is the ethicalness regarding data of an AI now? And that gives purchasers, end users, and nations an understanding of the quality of the AI that's being innovated by developers and organizations. And this includes your big four, right? So what it is, it's like, as we move ethics into data, and as we start to do better, then the ethicalness of AI starts to improve and moves from a lower ranking into a higher ranking. And so what we're creating is competition. Competition amongst all the AI providers, all the AI innovators and inventors, to work in harmony towards ethics in AI in order to be relevant in the next world reality. And so democratization of innovation is so important. We want to empower every single innovator to be able to innovate ethical AI, or what we call evolutionary AI. And this book explains how to do it. It contains models for nations, models for businesses, models for investors, guidance to academia and students. So we believe this will become the standard curriculum for all universities of their students. Because those that are learning AI at the moment, CK, need to understand philosophy. They need to understand human culture. There is depth that is now needed in the AI innovation process. And so what we do is we have a model for data ethics, and we have a model for AI, for ethical AI or evolutionary AI. I'm not going to disclose it now, but what we do is we disclose how to train AI with an understanding of our world, our understanding of our planet and our ambitions for the environment, and also how to work with the individual. But we go deeper. We talk about democratic AI. How does AI align with the democratic values and ethics of a nation or a culture? We also talk about environmental AI. How can AI ethics understand the purpose of a nation in order to transform its environmental partnership? We go into depth. So we're really excited about this. And at the moment, AI ethics is brittle. It looks at certain things. It tries to classify us in our color, our race, our creed, our age. That's brittle. How do we create a softness in AI? And to do that, it needs to understand the individual at any moment in time. And that requires new data governance models. It requires public trust in order to bring the public into training what we call digital buddy or personalized AI. And so we reveal all this in the book. And we're really excited about it because, you know, CK, artificial intelligence at the moment is locked in a prison. It doesn't understand how to work with our humanity. So how do we release AI to work with our humanity? How do we improve our manufacturing, our cities to become trusted machine-centric processes? You know, the UK and Japan have an initiative called emotional AI in smart cities, but that doesn't go to the ethics and values of an individual. We don't want to be placated by AI. We want to be supported to evolve with AI. So we disclose how ethical AI can support the evolution and development of an individual based on sovereignty and free will. And we talk about a lot in the book. It's like 5 books in one, CK. So really, this is a grown-up conversation for the world to say, what is the destiny of humanity? What is our relationship with the planet? And how do we bring AI alongside as an evolutionary partner that's trusted to walk with us in innovating the future?
Yeah, no, interesting. I think, yeah. So like, as we all know, AI discussion is not something new. It has started since 1954 when the paper was published, and even maybe before that, if you go back in the history as well.
Turing and the US kicked it all off. And, you know, these are important concepts. And so we do talk about Alan Turing at depth. And actually, we talk about the Turing Institute too, because they're doing some great stuff. And so that's important. So for example, the Turing Test, for example, CK, if you're in a city, right, and a service is giving you something, and we want, for example, to have a particular experience walking along the city. Maybe we want wittiness as part of the experience from AI. Well, wittiness for you and wittiness for me may be different, because based on our personality, our character traits, our culture, and our mood at any moment in time. And so the personalization of AI depends on us getting our ethics right. We can't put a plaster over this, CK. We have to get to the heart of the conversation. And so this really is a kind of an empowerment to innovate AI in a brand new way that never has been offered before.
Right. On the same topic, as a lot of discussions around the world are happening on smart cities. In Singapore, we talk about smart nation and so on and so forth. But for example, in Singapore, we have about like roughly 5.5 million population. And if you ask what is smart city, as you said, there'll be 5.5 million definition, right? Because smart city for me, smart city for Neha, smart city for Jimmy will be everything different. But at the same time, when the service providers, whether it's private companies, whether it's government agencies, are providing services to all three of us, the expectation, obviously based on some AI and digital twin topics, but expectation from all three of us will be different, right? So many times when we converse with companies who are providing and building some solutions with called AI, because depend on which level of the AI it is, whether it's a G or just another advanced algorithms, they still have to figure it out. As I said, if they're serving one individual, then is one part. Similarly, if they're serving one machine, if you're talking about it within the machine-to-machine environment in Industry 4.0, there's another part. But now we're talking about not just connected machine within the assembly line, but we're talking about a smart connected factory. So my quick question, obviously, as you mentioned, you have tried to address this in the book, but any quick pointers they should keep in mind when they're working towards this Industry 4.0 journey? These are the 5 things I should ask within my stakeholders at the CXO level. And I should also ask the people on the ground who are actually going to use this technology at the day. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yes. So first of all, great question. So the question is, so what we have to do is, how do we ensure that the ethical AI within our borders, whether they be a company, a region, a city, or a nation, complies with our ethics? And so we have to build an ethical foundation for the physical borders in order for the digital borders to have intelligences that comply with those standards. And we reveal how to do this. Right. So that's one thing, because it aligns with the culture, the values, the bias of that particular border. OK, so that's important. Now, when we're looking at things like distributed manufacturing, when we're looking at distributed emergency response, distributed resource control, distributed transportation, when we're looking at that within the region, if we have our ethical AI values programmed into the mindset of AI, that's deployed throughout all those applications, now you have a common intelligence working for common goals. So what happens if we have some environmental targets, and in manufacturing, in cities, in resource management, in energy production, they're all working toward the same goal in harmony. Never been done before. This is where we need to go. And so to do that in a trusted way is to build an ethical foundation, what I call an evolutionary ethical foundation, for a particular region or nation that basically has defined what I call, I'm not going to give too much away here, let's just say it's to do with DNA, that define the templates, the mindsets of AI that are then inherited by all AIs that are then deployed throughout the different aspects of a nation and region. This has not been discussed before, and we need to get to the heart of the matter. If we are absolutely passionate about leaving a legacy that is robust and evolutionary for the next generation, it's really important.
Yeah. So I think I still have a lot of questions. So maybe if you allow, I would like to bring Jeremy on board in this conversation, and when we go, and then we can go back to our continued conversation with rest of the speakers and maybe even the audience, because I see some questions are already coming in.
Right, thank you, CK. Thanks for the introduction and for the privilege to share today. Yes, indeed. We are working with a lot of AI companies, particularly APAC and Russia, so China, India, and the rest of Southeast Asia. We are seeing very interesting and exciting solutions coming up. And I think what we can talk about today is perhaps more tangible frameworks that investors use. I think Neha, Dr. Neha and Matthew laid out very clear conceptual fundamentals for us to build on with this discussion. But I think I would like to turn the audience attention perhaps to a more specific role for ethics in today's context, and perhaps also focusing more on specialized AI rather than general AI. There's a broad difference, and in the nearer term, specialized AI will give us more pressing issues. General AI, the doom and gloom of AI taking over the world, I think that is still further down the road in terms of development. But I think what we can really discuss about is how technology, AI specifically, will integrate into our lives and work bit by bit, and in some areas quite intrusively and causing a lot of disruption. So perhaps let me share my screen with everyone. I have a couple of slides to really run through how we can look at AI a bit more objectively. So before we jump right in, let me just give a brief introduction about ourselves. So Sistema Asia Capital is a MAS regulated technology fund here in Singapore. So I'm based here in Singapore with a team that specializes in investing in smart city technology. So I think this is a very good segue from Matthew's content. So over here, we look at AI companies on a daily basis. Some of them have really exciting and new use cases. So today I will be covering some of the use cases and how we apply certain frameworks in certain examples. And I think this will give a bit more color on how we can really incorporate ethics on the ground in terms of investments. So we look at just a broad overview. We look at AI in all sorts of verticals right now, mainly covering B2B and B2G segments. So Industry 4.0, which AllThingsConnected is very involved in. We deal with big data, 5G backhauling technology, cybersecurity, and automation across business verticals. We are looking at legal, we are looking at healthcare, so on and so forth. So let me touch a little more about these specific use cases in my latest slides. So as Dr. Neha and Matthew mentioned, this is a multi-stakeholder responsibility. Who decides good or bad AI? So you have governments, innovators, investors, corporates, and consumers at large. But for today's context, we will mainly focus around what the investor can do. So as an investor, I think there are three primary roles that we play in society. Number one is definitely for responsible capital allocation. You will want more capital to be channeled to productive innovation. Innovation that is for the greater good of mankind. So I think that's first and foremost for a technology investor. And next, after that, the next stage is for us as investors to look at how we can manage certain risks for investments. That's one of our primary role, other than looking for financial returns on our investments. So how do we mitigate certain risks? Can we partition certain parts of the business? Can we rework some of the models so that it's more palatable? Worst case scenarios are really not detrimental at all. And of course, a very important role for us is to provide optimism for the market. It's to open up the minds of mankind to look at what's the next frontier. And I think with the combination of all these three factors, we can have a more holistic and wholesome approach to investing in technology. So of course, this is something that we use at Sistema Asia. It's a very brief assessment framework that we use to assess how ethical AI is. Of course, this is not Of course, this is not the most comprehensive out there, not the most extensive out there, but it works for our purpose, and it really gives us a very good foundation to figure out certain principles that we want in our investments. So first of all is the purpose of the AI technology, whether there are any conflicts, moral hazards, agency problems. Number two is the data. I'll individually touch on these later on. So I'll just give a brief run through of these 4 different stages: purpose, data, process, and how we assess the risk impact of the technology. So first of all, purpose is the general technology for the greater good of mankind. So if this particular AI technology is going to displace the workforce in certain areas, is this still useful for us? Or is this a necessary evil to push us further into development of a certain sector? Second, benefits of the technology, but at whose cost or at what expense? So this is something that we will have to consider as well. So this is a more granular breakdown of all the 4 stages. Next, I mentioned this just now, are there obvious agency problems, moral hazards, so on and so forth? And are there currently any peripheral regulations around this specific technology? So this, for purpose, is definitely the broadest stage for us to log into. And next, of course, is data. There's a lot coming out from this segment right now. So we look at data ownership, whether the particular company has a proprietary or third-party data, and do they have the authority to use that data, and whose data are they using? Does the business or the consumer have the right to privacy? So there are a lot of issues around that, and of course how safe the data is. Just now Dr. Neha briefly touched on this as well. Is there enough cybersecurity to defend the data? And of course, data is never 100% unbiased. So what's the tolerance level for the biasness, and is there any sort of discrimination of individuals when assessing this data? Third is the process of decision making for these AI solutions. So is there transparency in the decision process? Are you able to track the various stages of the decision process, and can this be reverse engineered by a human being, your colleague, for example? Can he come in and say, I think there's a problem in this particular stage. We need to rework and update this entire process. Is there a level of autonomous control? Can a human come in to filter or reinforce certain decision process in the entire solution? And of course, what is the accuracy, error tolerance of the prediction model, of the diagnostic model? And last of all, how can the company or the engineers have this continuous improvement of the decision process, and is there enough governance around this to ensure that it's robust enough and trustable? So last is the immediate and delayed impact. How do we assess risk for the matter in this particular use case? So is there immediate, say, harm done to humans, or is there perhaps a consequence that is indirect? I will give some examples later on. And of course, what's the worst case effects, and how do we mitigate that? So as investors, of course, we also need to be very preemptive. We need to expect certain areas to be more risky, and we have to have measures to help companies navigate around those areas. So I think because of time, we'll keep this quite short. I'll just dive right into some of the use cases that we have today. And this is mainly around specialized AI, which we feel is closer to ground, which is actually happening right now. Some certain solutions are scaling as we speak in China and the rest of Asia. So I'll pick a couple that are perhaps some controversial, some more exciting to explore. First of all is the use case of computer vision. I'm sure most of you have seen something like this on the net recently. Increasingly AI is used for computer vision, and it has raised some concerns. So over here we have an example of a deep fake, which is basically taking off someone's face and placing it on another object or another individual. Now, this is a very controversial application of AI. So if we were to assess the purpose of such a technology stack, what would we do? We believe technology is amoral, but the intent of use can differ from each user. And whether it's for optimized creative advertising, which is usually the good sense of such implementation, or is it for identity fraud? How can we justify investing in a company with such a feature? I think there are clearer areas for us to look at, and to turn the tables around, we are interested to instead invest in and work with companies that have deepfake detection technology for identity authentication that can be used in banks, government agencies, and so on and so forth. For us, as an investor, we have chosen to only focus on certain areas of computer vision. And this is for very obvious reasons. We want the intent to be very clear. And in this particular case, technology is already in the market. So we are looking for ways we can be on the good side. And for this matter, it's identity authentication. We are looking also at synthetic voice biometric and detect fake synthetic voices that people can use to impersonate identity. So this is one for computer vision, particularly for purpose. I hope this shows how we can effectively look at the intent of certain technologies. Next, let's take a look at how we assess data, for example. And in this use case, we have industrial surveillance. This is a technology that's implemented in an oil and gas facility. So here we have a network of about 1,000 different CCTVs loaded with high performance facial recognition software spread across the entire facility to monitor the safety of workers at the facility and to really pinpoint if workers are wearing the right PPE. If there's someone not wearing a helmet, this particular technology can recognize the face and flag it out to the security team or safety team. So I think, so if we were to have this conversation, what potential ethical problems could come out of this? Similarly, I think the intent is very clear. This is for strict safety requirements in a particular facility. And with technology like that, your security team can now have a larger load, a larger network of cameras that can be monitored with a smaller team. Typically, on average, one security personnel can monitor about 30 different camera screens. But with automated technology like this, one person can easily manage about 500 cameras, and you only get notifications flagged out when you have actual violations of certain safety measures. So what about data? For such a case, data is proprietary. It's coming from the business itself, no outside data, and they have a moat that they have built. It's either on-prem or high security cloud infrastructure that they host all their data on. And who gives the data? The workers' faces. All this data is already in the confined universe, in the registry of the company, and it's not getting outside third-party data that they might not have the rights to. So for us, such a case is very clear. It will give us the green light to explore this company even more. We do not see any conflict of data authority or ownership. So in this case, it's something that we are increasingly looking at. There are there are a lot of exciting companies doing industrial surveillance right now, and we are in the market for such a solution. Next, it's for cybersecurity. I know post-COVID, the threat rates are increasingly at a huge momentum. So now for cybersecurity, let's talk about automation, for example. In cybersecurity, right now, there is this solution called SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation and Response. So what this typically basically do is to automate the bulk of your cybersecurity operations. So in the past, your cybersecurity personnel will have to assess a particular flagged notification for threat, and then he follows a guidebook, a rule book to execute certain protocols until he solves the security threat. But with the increased traffic of security threats right now, a lot of teams, cybersec teams, are bogged down by all this additional operational demands. And with automation, AI coming in to help sort out a lot of this processes, automating this through RPA and so on and so forth, it's definitely given teams a lot more headspace to deal with crucial issues that will require more time and effort. So for this case, you are guiding the AI with a rule book that has been set out by the team or security agency. And over here, what we do as investors is to really assess the decision process of this particular AI technology, whether there is a last line of human intervention to check, to authorize, to confirm certain actions. That's very, very crucial for us. And of course, can the steps be traced? And can they be interpreted by a third party or fellow colleague, for example, if he were to open up this black box to figure out what went wrong for this particular threat? Is there an alternative process in place? Sometimes it's not a black or white decision process. There's a spectrum of other options for you to choose. And is there availability or the option for humans to come in to make certain decisions in place of that? So I think this is the most tedious process for assessing out of the four, but it's also extremely crucial because as an investor, this is also what sets a lot of AI technologies apart from the pack. The truly good ones have a very, perhaps a more granular and more interpretable technology that is with high accuracy. So this is what we want in a lot of companies that we look at. Last of all, this has been talked about a lot, autonomous drones, delivery. This, of course, has a lot of controversies around it because it's a complex problem. You are gelling a lot of different technologies together. You have computer vision for navigation, you have geospatial technology to guide certain drones to their destination, and you need certain sensors for the machine to avoid traffic, avoid human beings, or to make the right decisions in a split second. So we are also experimenting with a lot of this mobility technology in the space. Particularly right now also with 5G, where there is a lower latency and the opportunity to make decisions at a faster pace. So for autonomous drones, there's quite a lot of regulation around it, and it's usually the bottleneck or the hindering cause to the adoption of these solutions on a large scale. So for us, as we look at smart city technology, this is definitely one area where we are trying to push the frontier as well in terms of working with regulators on how we can mitigate certain risks. Of course, there are a lot of worst case scenarios that can happen for a lot of these use cases, but how us as investors can we help companies navigate through regulations? how can we increase the safety requirements for some of these implementations. So there are some areas in this particular niche that is less complex. For example, short-haul logistics with a fixed route. This is blocking out a lot of external factors. You don't have a lot of unexpected traffic. You don't have, so let me just give a more concrete example. Shuttling services in a controlled facility, in a mining facility. It's perhaps 2 kilometers wide. You have trucks coming in and out repeatedly throughout the day, same route, same traffic conditions. Autonomous drones in that particular setting is perhaps less risky than, say, having a shuttle service for passengers in LA or Shenzhen, for example. So there are areas where we will tend to skew ourselves to look at, particularly because of risk factors. And as investors, this is extremely important for us. And when we look at a particular company that has great potential, but maybe just need that little guidance in terms of regulation or pivoting their business to avoid certain risk parameters, this is what we do as well. And we help them to drive certain conversations with regulators and, of course, to remodel their risk structure and to reduce the impact of certain malfunctions and eliminate worst-case scenarios if possible at all. So I hope, I know I'm going through some of this pretty quickly, but because of time, I would love to save more of our time today with the open discussion. So I would like to end off with this. There has been a lot of advocacy over the last couple of years, and particularly with individuals like Matthew himself, with all the emerging technology that is springing out. There will be a time where there is standardized protocols accepted globally, but we believe that not all of them will be internationally agreed standards. Like what we have today, we have the metric measurement, so on and so forth, different plug sockets around the world. So we believe there will be segments where there are cultural variations, as we see also in data privacy regulation and guidelines. But what is very obvious is for more global collaboration, and this is definitely a necessity for an increasingly borderless future. We need more governance for bad actors and institutions, and we need definitely more toolkits, best practices, ethical guidelines to forge the way forward with AI.
Dr. Neha and Matthew also spoke that there's a multiple stakeholders who have to come together to understand the influence of this technology. There have to be regulatory requirement, there have to be a privacy requirement, there's cybersecurity requirement. And before we get to this open conversation, so participants, so now we are into the open conversation and the sort of, I won't call it panel discussion, but like a free floor discussion. As a speakers, they can jump in anytime to add, debate, comment, challenge. I have been following this particular project, which I think most of you might be aware of from MIT Media Lab, called Moral Machine. In fact, because I was trying to invite the people who are behind the project, Moral Machine. It started around 2015-ish. The objective was the old challenge of the problem they're trying to solve is, as we also talk about in autonomous vehicles kind of technology, that if something goes wrong, who should we be picking up on? Is it a company who is writing the AI algorithm? Is it a company who is building up the chassis? Or is a company building the ECU? Or the communication technology providers like 5G? Everybody's trying to sell the 5G, right? So the Moral Machine project was very interesting. I think it's not live anymore, but the results are already published. The idea is, I was envisioning it more like, for example, the way people drive in India, for example, their morale is different. The way people drive in Singapore, their morale is different, and so on and so forth. So could there be a possibility that maybe a company who is building up this AV technology, when they're shipping it to, let's say, India, they will download this morale of India version and then ship the product out there, and then they ship it to Singapore, they download this morale, and then now this I'm moving back to India, for example, after spending time. Then I will bring my chassis with the engine, but now I upgrade this to Indian version. So do you see
Yes.
something like this,
You're
Matthew or Jamie, in your
Yes,
conversation?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is the way it would work, is that obviously in the US they drive on the rights, whereas I've experienced Mumbai and they drive anywhere, right? It's fun.
Yeah.
It's great fun, right? And the speed, I mean, particularly in maybe in Singapore as well, the speed these cars go at are really quick, and the distance between the cars are it's very close, right? And that's acceptable. That's the way it works. So what I would imagine is this, is that the US would have some kind of ethical foundation of how AI will work in transportation, for example, the smart car. But when it goes to India, it has a different DNA within it that complies with the ethics of maybe Mumbai, Jaipur, you know, whatever, right? So that's the way it has to work. And Jeremy touched on this. I thought it was a wonderful presentation, and congratulations on finding two brilliant speakers. But that's the way I think it will work. But moreover, and I'll ask Jeremy and Dr. Neha and the audience, is that I think the car is going to be the central piece for data ownership, personal data storage, and also your AI as well, where it interacts with lots of different systems around you. And I suspect that we'll start to see data storage not going to the cloud anymore, but being resident across the edge, like, for example, the OpenFog and the IEC standard. I think that data may never get to the cloud, and it will start following us in our own personal vaults with our own digital buddy that's AI trained, personalized for us. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, but it's a great question. Thank you.
Yep. And any comments, Neha, Jimmy, on the same topic? How do you see this personalization of AI?
Yes, perhaps I could give it a shot. Yes, I think India will be the ultimate test for AV, autonomous driving. If it's a video game, India will be like the boss level, the highest level for complexity. But of course, like what I mentioned, I believe there will be a very localized approach. There will be cultural variations in terms of guidelines and ethical standards. But for complex issues like autonomous driving, I think we have to think more granular than that. And that is how laws have been passed, laws have been created, particularly also in the aviation industry. Aviation is built around safety. I think a lot of that culture will start to shift into this sphere as well. In the past, flying was extremely dangerous, but I think over the years we have refined with more granular laws, safety requirements, and I think this progression in terms of thinking about safety, that culture will also migrate into autonomous driving, and I think it's inevitable that AV will be safe for mankind, but it's how long this conversation will take and how much cross-border collaboration is going to happen. Right now, we see geopolitics coming in. It's a little speed bump in terms of development, but I think as we look at the broader picture for mankind, it is inevitable that we will get to where we want.
All right. So, Dr. Neha, if you have any comments on that, and before that, as we were hearing Jeremy's presentation, that the advantage of technology is that it will enable the borderless cities, hopefully. But at the same time, how this transition, that the work which you might have been doing some research on the way Indians behave, the Chinese behave, or the Russian behave, or the US behave. So how do you see this transition that while they are specific silo approach to ethics, but at the same time, maybe another 20 years down the line, it will change also dynamically. Any thoughts on that?
That's a great question, I would say, because India is such a big country with so many demographic locations. You can find locations that are very rural India, where if intelligent car is there, then people will flock on their side and just to look at the car or touch it. On the other side, there are metropolitan cities which are quite comparable to to what we have in developed countries right now, Singapore, US, China, big countries, all the developed countries. So the approach to India is, I think it will be very progressive. So first, if we deploy the same technology in metropolitan cities such as Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, all these cities, the difference will not be much. But as we go down to more towns and rural India and even the villages, then there is really the IQ test of this machinery will be very high. They should be even higher on their intelligence level. Because it's really a very stress test for the machine when you go to these areas. The road situation will not be good. There will not be GPS working. There will not be the kind of basic assumptions of this machinery will not be there. So how to make a robust system that is so scalable to even be ready for rural part of the world will be even another level of innovation. And if someone is able to do that, it will add great value not only in the Indian context but also in all developing countries context. The rural condition in India is same as in Africa, is same as in other Asian countries. So this will be, I think, the next step once the AI is up to the mark in metropolitan context. Then the next step will be to look for more future-ready, intelligent AI for rural areas.
Right. I think as we also, right now everybody talk about the smart city, smart nation, but I think the discussion have to slowly start towards smart villages, smart rural areas also. There's a first question here from Jose. He's a teacher's assistant at the University of Technology, Sydney. So his question is, if you have to do an AI ethics audit, is it possible to audit algorithms, or would you focus on the data input, the output, and the objective from an ethics point of view? Means at the end of the day, whatever program you use to write the code and algorithms, but what matters is the impact it's going to bring. So any thoughts on that? What this auditing part of this technology should look like? Anybody can jump in. Matthew?
Sure, I've got some thoughts. So I can't reveal too much, but the AI data ethics model caters for this. If you get rubbish in, you get rubbish out. It doesn't really matter. If you have magnificence in, so how do you create magnificence in the data sets? Well, that goes to some of the points that Jeremy mentioned is, do you have the rights to own it? Is it fake data? What are the ownership permissions? What's the culture of the actual company that's creating the data sets? What's the governance around it? Do you comply to governance? There's all sorts of different questions we can ask to determine the ranking of the quality of the input ethics. Now, this is what I think we'll see. I think eventually we'll see AI classifying the ethicalness of AI. That will take trial and error, and this is a huge innovation for any country or any culture to start examining how do they create AI to be able to certify other AIs. And this is really, really quite important. What we're looking is, how do we take subjective questioning to the Turing questions? How do we take subjective questioning and actually put it into an intelligence that can create trusted outcomes concerning a specific ethicalness of a particular data set and also AI?
Maybe I can include the next question also from Divela from Zensar Technologies. Is there any digital ethics body available who is monitoring and controlling AI-based algorithms developed by various organizations? So I'm sure, have you come across any of such organizations, or you're building up your own methodology as you presented some of the topics? Because at the end of the day, like Matthew was also talking about, there have to be certain standard, or maybe not a standard, maybe a framework more so, depending on the complexity of the solution. So have you come across any of such body?
We are currently looking at speaking to certain think tanks that are looking into this area. But I think this specifically is still in a very nascent state. I think much like the aviation industry, let me just go back to the example. A lot of that regulation is being driven from Western implementations. And I believe for the Asian context, it will reflect some sort of trajectory that also follows that. But I think there will be more and more conversations in Asia as we scale certain technologies. So China, for example, they are one of the most active builders of smart cities at huge scales. Data centers, for example, they don't just build data centers anymore, they call them data cities when they have data centers stacked up for an entire street. When you see technology implemented at the kind of scale and when there is a negative consequence or negative occurrence event triggered, laws will happen. And I think if that is more frequently happening in Asia, sooner or later, there will be regulations around that. That is more event triggered.
So data is precious, no doubt, but it is likely to hold it at the collection point where we are basically collecting the data either on the sensor side or the edge side. And there could be potential threats from both cybersecurity point of view, or maybe also who is actually providing this infrastructure, right, for the financial gain and getting the advantage over the competitor. For example, that if I'm the technology provider who is building the sensor or edge computing technologies at the sensor node itself, but do you see there have to be certain laws and international laws and best practices so that if I'm the one who's basically the data source, I can't hold other partners on ransom, that I can't give you the data, I won't give you the data unless you do some certain thing for us, sort of thing. So how do we create this framework and we make sure that for the benefit of the larger good, we share the data with the rest of the value chain? So for example, as we all know that IoT solution, whether it's agri-tech, health tech, fintech, whichever, they largely take like 7 layers of technologies, right? So there are the sensor technologies, then there are gateways, the aggregation point where all the data comes and get aggregated, then goes to the cloud through a communication technology, whether it's 5G, BLE, Wi-Fi, whatever. Then there are the infrastructure providers like our AWS, Microsoft, and then comes the analytics AIPs. So before it hits the AI solution provider, it have to go through a certain value chain.
Yep.
So how do we make sure that all these multiple parties who are involved from technology perspective have been made sure that they are sharing the data, obviously one is security point of view, but from the law point of view. And any thoughts again, Dr. Neha, Matthew?
Yes. Well, Dr. Neha hasn't spoken yet, so let the doctor speak, and then I've got some thoughts, and it looks like Jeremy's got some thoughts too. So, ladies first.
Let's hear the part from the Neha.
Yeah, I think this is a very complex problem. It's there will not be any direct solution to this one because there are many players and there are many power dynamics. There are also financial gains associated with this one. But so far as the sharing of data is concerned, it's layered. What kind of data is there, and whether this is a confidential data, then definitely the sharing of this kind of data to a more international level will not be accepted by many parties, especially with those security or those security reasons that the data could be misused. So there has to be very proper guidelines when it comes to the usage of data, as well as to put the data in more public domain or to a wider, I would say, stakeholders that can use this data. But openness to data will be needed in near future as well if we are going towards a more global solution provider in terms of intelligent algorithms. Because across countries, as Matthew and Jeremy has also pointed out, that when it comes to a more global level, the intelligent solutions need to cater to individualized norms, practices, solutions, the way things work in India versus the way things work in US, and this kind of the very localized emic characteristics of demographic locations should be embedded in the data. So I would say that an openness across the countries, the big players, US, China, Russia, and the big players, they should come on board to make a more amicable kind of platform or solution, so that we have such organizations. WHO is one of the example. The United Nations is also another example. So this kind of initiative would greatly help in setting up a pitch for this solution. But of course, it's a very complex problem. So finding out the solution will take more effort and as well as consideration.
So Harish is a champion of open source, as many of the people in Singapore know him. So he's basically, while suggesting, is also asking your thoughts that open source is a fundamental for trust building. So, and any thoughts on that? As a lot of such initiative open source happening. Any thoughts, Matthew or Jimmy?
I certainly have thoughts, but it'll be comprehensive. So why don't we let Jeremy go first?
Right, sure. So perhaps a little about data. I beg to differ. I think this is one of the segments that has seen the greatest development over the last couple of years. We are looking at technology that compartmentalizing data, masking data at automated scale. This is through multi-party data sharing technology with a platform that you can inject different parties. I can choose to block out this data for this person. It all happens in real time. So we do see on the ground that there is tangible technology that is addressing this particular problem right now. But what we don't see yet is the consolidated effort to come out with regulations that is standardized. What we see is conversations that are driven more by the owners of the data, for example. If it's healthcare data owned by the government, they find it precious. They will have their own guidelines as to how it's being treated by other vendors. And so I think right now a lot of the initiatives are driven by the corporates themselves or the governments, and they are very, very specific use cases. But yes, I think we do see a lot of progress in that area over the last couple of years. It's also depending on the type of risk that might occur from using your particular open source code. So for example, OpenAI has chosen to provide APIs right now instead of open source, because they can now control the funnel of use for their particular technology. And this allows them to monitor the usage and really block out certain spectrums of use that they really find unethical. So I think this might be the way forward, but of course it's very, very specific for specific use cases. But this is the general thought process so far.
This is data and AI are going to become digital citizens, and we have to embrace this mindset. The freedoms that we have in democracy, we need to consider creating digital democracy for the very home in which data and AI will exist. We need to consider the mobility of data. We need to consider the mobility of AI across different ICT infrastructures and across regional and national boundaries. These are challenges that we need to face. We know that the US and the European Union have had problems in sharing data between the two of them. They've been found not to be good enough in terms of the practices. So let me ask you a question. What happens if data governance and data ownership was written into the silicon of every single computing device? What happens if we had a full kind of audit trail from originator, secondary, tertiary into the throughout the whole data trail, right, into AI, right? These are the concepts we need to think about, right? Now, if we're looking at nations collaborating that have the same democratic values, how do they share data sets in order to have a common ethical foundation for democracy? And then we're looking at East versus West divide, CK. So I think this is a great question, and there's a lot to innovate, as we've heard from Jeremy and Dr. Tripathi, to address this question. But I think if we start thinking about data as a digital citizen, AI as a digital citizen, and then thinking about putting democracy in there, the same freedoms that we have with mobility, then we're into an interesting way of innovating.
Thanks for the invite. I think it is important that we also, since you, Matthew, you brought up the notion of a democracy in this case, the notion of a digital bill of rights, because we need to have something like that in order to assess exactly what it is that, as a citizen in wherever I live, what are my exposures, so to speak, what are the kinds of expectations I should have, and what are my rights as a citizen. So if I were to walk down the street and I see a camera on the street light, and there must be something that tells me that this belongs to so and so. It could be the police force, it could be the building owner. I don't care who it is, but somebody. So that if I want to be able to say I want my data to be taken out, I want to be forgotten, for example. So things like that. There are many of these aspects that we need to consider, and this is the time to have that conversation and try and formulate models that enable engagement as a citizen in a digital era. So in order to do that, you need to have access to source code, you need to have access to hardware. I need to trust the hardware. How far down the rabbit hole do I want to go? Into what kind of hardware, what kind of firmware is there? Is there something sitting inside that can be triggered because of some event, and so on? So there are multiple parts to the story, but I just put my thoughts there. Thank you.
So that's beautiful.
That's a wonderful story. As we haven't met for some time, so I've been following your work also on open source. So maybe we should catch up some time. I think this topic does require some more debate and discussion. I think having a debate is always helpful because that will open up the ideas, and that's where the fundamental about the open source is. Anything which you want to respond to, Harish? Thoughts? Anybody? Before we kind of almost closing the session, we are kind of over time. But I think it has been wonderful discussion so far.
First of all, Harish is on the money. A digital bill of rights is very, very important. But the question is, if you want to be forgotten through a camera, Harish, that you talked about, then how do you do that? If you had a personalized AI that automatically protected your data because it had certain ethical values where you didn't want to be to have your information taken at a moment in time, right? This is the way we need to do it. We need to bring literally a living world with democracy in there that actually works on our benefit and to our behalf based on our own ethical virtues and our own sovereignty to protect us in that human-machine partnership. So very simply, I think Harish, that's a great point. Thank you for saying that.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks to Harish for sharing your thoughts. I agree with you.
Thank you so much. I think this was very interesting session, and we get to know from different perspectives. One of the most salient feature here is now we are recognizing the ethics or ethicality of AI and intelligent algorithms, and this is just the beginning. We have a long way to go. Right now, so far, we are only looking from the data security or the data perspective of algorithms. However, as one of the audience also pointed out that we have to think from different perspective, from the user's perspective, from the host perspective, as well as from the auditing perspective, where and how the ethicality of AI should be monitored, as well as should be considered as a very crucial point of acceptability towards intelligent algorithms, which need to be critically thought by not only engineers but also from decision makers, from those who are in very powerful positions, even globally, internationally, to come together to provide more global solutions which could benefit more in human, both for humans as well as the overall ecological, environmental, solutions of towards this intelligent algorithms. So yeah, it's just a beginning, and the process and the road is more challenging ahead, I would say.
Yep. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yes, I think as investors and one of the crucial stakeholders in this entire decision process, I think our role is to really look at each case very deeply and judge specifically for that particular solution. And I think over time we will accumulate experience enough, and through our heuristic approach, we will be able to consolidate maybe certain areas where would require more help and resources to initiate certain measures. And I think this is what we can do on the ground feasibly as investors, as one of the crucial stakeholders. And I think moving forward, there will definitely be greater progress towards ethics.
Thanks, Jeremy. And now, last but not the least, Matthew will close with your thought.
We need, basically, it's very simple. If we don't get our ethics right, the human-machine partnership will be fractured. And so in order for us to innovate a future and move forward, we need to bring the human-machine partnership together. And that means we need to get our ethics right. And our ethics is not, I believe it's about democratizing innovation. We will disclose in the book how communities and businesses can build their own ethical foundation. And I think this has to be put into the hands of the people. I really do. I think that we need to give innovators and AI entrepreneurs the tools to innovate the future, because it does need government support, and investors play an important role in supporting the AI entrepreneur. There's no doubt about that. But if we leave it to government, it'll get stuck in politics, it'll get stuck in agenda, and we won't go anywhere. So we need to basically democratize the future of AI ethics and put it into the hands of the developers and the innovators that are creating the technologies of tomorrow. And furthermore, we need to be independent of the culture and bias from the big technology giants that have their own agenda as part of AI and to control the future. We have to democratize AI and put it into the hands of the people, if you will, because I think that's interesting. It brings the public into the center of AI, so people are not scared about AI, which most of them are, but they're actually getting involved in innovating the future for their families, their communities, and also for what they care about. And I think this is important. So those are a few closing thoughts.
Thanks again, all the speakers, for sparing your dinner time and morning with us. Hope you have enjoyed this session as much as I have.